Hello and welcome to Founded, an airwave media podcast, where we find the stories you missed in history class, because the tea was hot before they dumped it into the harbor. I'm Tori Phantom, and joining me today is someone who has never seen the real Slim Shady, Gwenna Lathland.
He never stood up.
I know. It's kind of hard to
Repeated
tell.
requests for the real Slim Shady to stand up. Never did. So I don't know what to tell you, bro.
I know. It's disappointing.
Listen, when they asked for Spartacus, they all stood up. They asked for Slim Shady, just nothing but butts and chairs. This is not my fault.
Yeah. Well, lots of bleached heads standing up, but not
It's
not
a Rice
the
Krispie
real.
hair, ramen hair. Let's talk about times before they were allowed to turn their own hair ramen, so they wore wigs that definitely didn't have lice in them all the time.
All right. I need you to know on this pop quiz, I have made it more challenging.
Okay. Okay.
But we're gonna start off simple, okay?
Okay.
What was the Stamp Act again?
The Stamp Act is where they had to pay basically a tax to get a stamp for pretty much every piece of paper they ever used. And they didn't want to do that. But
And
the goose likes
who
stamps.
Yeah.
George
It was
Grenville.
George Grenville. He really loves stamps. Okay. Who was Thomas Hutchinson?
He was the lieutenant governor. Well, he was a bunch of things, but at the time of the Stamp Act, he was the lieutenant governor of Massachusetts.
Yes. Yes. And the Chief Justice.
Yes.
All right. Here's one that we haven't talked about in a bit. What were the selectmen?
Those were they court officials that were associated with the monarchy rather than the populace?
No. They
No.
were. I could see how you get there though, because it's like select, so they must be the select.
Yeah, I don't know.
I get it. So the selectmen were like a committee. They were kind of like a committee that created a mayor position. So they carried out and enforced the votes of the town meetings. They had authority over town finances, care of the poor, schools, admission of new residents, public works, land regulation, local defense, and appointment of other town officials that weren't elected positions. So kind of a lot.
It was mayor by committee.
Yeah, kind of. And last question. This is a trick question, kind of, because we haven't talked about this in like 15 episodes. So do you remember what the town meetings were, why they were important?
I mean, town meetings feel pretty obvious that like they met about things that were important to the town. There feels like there's 100 different ways that town meetings could happen, though.
So the town meetings, specifically when we're talking about Massachusetts and Boston, they were super important because that was kind of this foundation of democracy. So it was people who were not elected officials. It was the citizens who would go to the town meeting to decide town affairs. So not the laws, but like if they wanted something brought to the assembly, they would do something like all of them would vote for someone like Samuel Adams to write instructions to send to the assemblies. So that was kind of where they would make decisions about
the assemblies in England or the assemblies in the rest of the colonies?
Massachusetts assembly. So the Massachusetts government, you had the royal governor, you had the governor's council who were appointed by the assembly, and then the Massachusetts Assembly had representatives from all of the different areas. And so the different town meetings, that's where the towns would decide what was important to be brought to that assembly for the colony. So
was it the selectmen that they were making that they would then have to go to the assembly, and the selectmen are the ones who were like, hey, this little farming community needs more fish. Could we make that happen?
The selectmen were kind of in between the House and the town meeting. So the selectmen really handled the town affairs, like that mayor position, and they were appointed. And so we had like John Hancock, he was a selectman. Thomas Hutchinson at one point was a selectman. Samuel Adams Sr. was a selectman. So they were kind of the wealthy people in the town who kind of assumed this like mayor committee position. But the town meetings were for the townspeople to discuss all of the issues and then be able to send those issues to the government.
Let me make sure I've got this hierarchy right. So we've got town meetings where everybody in a town can show up, and then they would pick one amongst themselves to be like, all right, you have our complete list of demands, needs, and requirements. You go take this to the Massachusetts Assembly. They would take that to the Massachusetts Assembly. If there was something that the Assembly could do, they would then go to the governor's board and
Council,
tell them. And then the
yep,
governor's board would then turn around and either tell Francis or Thomas, hey, this little town needs more fish. We don't know why, but it feels like a reasonable request. Maybe could we send more fish?
yes, yeah, kind of like that. In the
Okay.
most basic terms, yes. And you can kind of think about the assembly, the Massachusetts Assembly and the council, like the United States House and Congress and Senate.
Oh,
So,
okay.
you know, we have the
Okay.
House of Representatives and then we have the Senate, kind of like that.
Well, and honestly, at the time for the colonial breakup, that sort of makes sense because the governor's board was really vested in the British interest and the state assembly, the Massachusetts Assembly, was really vested in. So theoretically, like on paper, these two would be able to middle ground all of the decisions that both benefited the British across the
And
pond and benefited the colonies. But like functionally, we just know that that's never how government works.
yeah, it worked pretty efficiently for them until around this time. But
well, yeah, because the governor's boards, the British people stopped listening to all the things that were being said by the assemblies and the various councils and the.
Exactly. But before we get into today's episode, the meat of it, I am going to take you through a quick recap of the last 8 to 10 episodes. So we're just all starting on the same page before we move on. Because
this is review for the test, kids.
Yeah, kind of. This is the moment where things really start to shift. Okay, because you got to understand that the American colonists were living through truly unprecedented times, and that's why all of these happenings were
such a triggering phrase.
I know. But that's why all these things that were happening were so revolutionary. Okay, because here we go. The colonists were enjoying their time being Englishmen. They're basically ignored by the crown, but this works out great because they really enjoy smuggling. But then George Grenville steps into power across the ocean and realizes that it costs more to collect customs duties than the customs officers are collecting. So he comes up with a plan to get money out of the colonies because they should be paying their fair share of endlessly going to war with France. Step 1 of Grenville's plan: the Sugar Act, which the colonists didn't like, and Samuel Adams in particular really hated. But the Sugar Act had the super sneaky Stamp Act slid inside for later. George, the gaslighting goose Grenville, says, nah, guys, we don't have to do the stamp thing so long as you come up with a plan in place of it. And also, it's a whole year away, so you can send in your petitions and grievances for us to consider. Also, the Currency Act passes, prohibiting colonists from using any money that isn't British tender, which they don't have, as everyone just stopped fighting the 7 Years' War and no one has any money. But then the colonists send petitions with their grievances and ask clarifying questions so they can come up with their own plan to raise the money that Grenville wanted. But that goose goes ahead and avoids the question every time it's asked and seems kind of offended that anyone would even dare to ask it. And then Parliament makes a rule to not read any of the petitions because honestly, they're pretty mad that those silly, stupid colonists are questioning Parliament's authority. The horror. Anyway, the Stamp Act passes along with the Quartering Act that requires colonists to find housing and fund the British regular army whenever necessary, but truly all the colonists care about is those stinking stamps. Quickly, people start writing articles and pamphlets against it, and then Patrick Henry comes out with his magical multiplying resolves, and people get even more feisty. Which brings us to August 14th, 1765 in Boston, where the townspeople hung an effigy of their stamp man, Andrew Oliver, along with a devil boot in a protest-turned-riot, where they tore down a building and inspired all of the other colonies to host their own craft night. Bing, bang, boom, lots of effigies and stamp man resignations because you can't have a stamp act without stamp men. But then something else happens, something different that changes everything. A mob destroys Lieutenant Governor Thomas Hutchinson's home on August 26th, 1765, and that one hits different for our dear colonists. I just synopsized like a whole lot of episodes, and I am proud of myself for that. I'm not
I
much
am
of a
90%
synopsizer.
sure. I'm 90% sure that because you were reading from your screen, you were not tracking what I was doing over here. There's a whole interpretive dance.
That is exciting.
It's cringe. It's cringe. It's for those of you watching on video, I hope you enjoyed whatever that was. I don't think I could do it again.
I am very excited to watch this back. But after Thomas Hutchinson's home was torn down,
yeah,
there was a very different vibe in Boston the next day.
So, okay, wait, like we know just historically this is part of what's taught in at least college level courses that cover this. Like, yeah, there were consequences this time. Why were there consequences for Tommy Boy's house coming down, but not for Andy's house coming down?
We are going to get to that today.
Okay.
That is a big part of this. So we're going to start,
like, they rioted the first time, and there weren't really consequences, which, again, we discussed then. It's a little difficult to enforce the consequences when the sheriff and the militia were both like, I don't know what to tell you. Half my guys are in the mob.
Yeah. Send the militia.
Also,
the militia is the mob.
They're scary. Yeah. They're scary mobs. I don't want to do that.
Did you see how quickly they tore down that building? I don't know about that one.
With their bare hands. I mean, it's 18th century technology. We're talking wooden nails, but still, that's
imagine all the splinters. We are starting today with the opening of the court the morning after the riot when the Chief Justice showed up. He showed up to court. And Thomas Hutchinson was known for being...
bold move, but...
Yeah. And he was known for being well-dressed and groomed. But this day, he didn't have his judicial robes or his powdered wig because they'd, been burned the night before. But when he walked through the doors into the courtroom, everyone gasped. Hutchinson was still in his evening clothes, and the exhaustion was visible. The knees on his fine silk breeches were soiled, as if he'd been kneeling in, soil. His cravat and his white shirt were stained from sweat and wrinkled, and his mess of hair was tied back with a ribbon that had probably been lent to him by one of his daughters. One onlooker said he'd always remember Thomas's face. Quote, with tears starting from his eyes in a countenance which strongly told the inward anguish of his soul. And everyone in that courtroom rose when Hutchinson took his place at the bench. But he didn't start the proceedings to hear the cases for the day. I mean, obviously, how could you judge things without your judicial robes? But instead...
The curly wig is important.
Honestly, you can't proceed without the wig. So instead, he told his story. He told the story of what happened to him and his family the night before to all who were present in the courtroom, from the lawyers and clients to the other judges. And he said the only clothes he had to his name were the clothes on his back. And then he said, quote, I call my maker to witness that I never was aiding, assisting, or supporting what is commonly called the Stamp Act. But obligations took priority over rights for Hutchinson, which is why he'd never publicly opposed it. And he gave a speech.
Basically, that breaks down to, I swear to God, I didn't like it, but I had a job.
Yep. Literally, just a fancier way of saying it. And then he gave a speech trying to convince people of, quote, the fatal effects to the province of the violent opposition to the government which was beginning to take place. And he continued by condemning all mob violence, especially against an innocent man. And he ended his speech saying, quote, I pray that God give us better hearts. And then court was adjourned for the day.
Tommy, that was a low blow. You're all bad people. I hope God makes you better.
Yeah. But that wasn't the only happening of the day, you see. There was the largest town meeting ever that came together at Faneuil Hall, where the destruction was condemned by everyone. There was a unanimous vote in favor of calling on the town selectmen and the town magistrates to do everything within their power to keep this kind of chaos from happening again. The fire companies and militia, even from neighboring towns, were called to keep a constant guard, and they stayed on guard for weeks. The size of the Boston militia doubled from the Bostonians who volunteered. However, Hutchinson made a real good point in his history book, saying, quote, "It could not be doubted that many of those who had been abettors of those violent proceedings were present at the unanimous vote." Basically saying, yeah, I know that at least a lot of you who were so disgusted by this were also the people who tore down my house and cut down my trees.
Yeah.
Which
But
is,
hey, listen,
yeah,
listen, we're going to give a certain amount of grace. There is a point at which a lot of people are like, this is a good idea. And then they do the idea. And then they figure out that was a bad idea.
yeah.
That's how we keep factional and divided.
And mob mentality is a real psychological thing. So
Yeah.
this specific mob from that night before really shifted public opinion. And you might think someone like Samuel Adams was one of the rioters. I mean, he did openly hate Thomas Hutchinson, and he wrote a lot of scandalous pieces about Tommy in his gossip magazine, at the Boston Gazette. But there's no evidence showing that he was a part of the violence.
Evidence or no, I'm mostly sure he hung the dang boot. That feels like a Samuel Adams coded communication.
It does. It does. But Samuel Adams was more likely to be the type to have someone else do it. He was more of a mastermind, okay? Because evidence actually shows that Samuel Adams believed in the rule of law in that you couldn't be free without rational and moral behavior, referring to what happened to Hutchinson as, quote, truly mobbish. And Samuel's view was weirdly similar to Hutchinson's, just in a different font, because Hutchinson said that, quote, the better sort are for defending liberties by lawful means. The most abandoned will do it at any cost. So both of them are like, protest is fine. Protest is good. Don't tear down people's homes. Like that was their vibe.
Right. Like you can complain, but you can't break the laws, because the moment you look at the laws, even if you are protesting some of those laws, the moment you start breaking all of them, you've invalidated your own point.
Yeah. And Andrew Oliver of the effigy fame, who was basically victim blamed at his mob, he said, quote, "It seems as if the people only were capable of restoring peace," which I think is a really interesting take on this, because it's true. The people were really kind of uniting. And so after all of this violence, it was only the people who could calm things down. The government was really not able to do this.
Right.
But to answer your question, what made Hutchinson's house so different from Andrew Oliver's house? Well, the effigy attack from the Little Black Cloud was seen as different from the Hutchinson house hullabaloo because Andrew Oliver's Black Cloud riot was a grievance-related
we can't
protest.
just glaze back. No. We can't just glaze past the Hutchinson house hullabaloo.
I was proud of that. Yeah.
Carry on.
But Andrew's Black Cloud riot was different from the Hutchinson house hullabaloo because the Black Cloud was a grievance-related protest, which was totally acceptable at the time. Riots happened.
Okay.
They happened. And most Bostonians approved of it. Even Royal Governor Francis Bernard justified it in a way, saying it was done, quote, as a necessary declaration of their resolution not to submit to the Stamp Act. And he even said that the way that they treated Oliver and his family was justified, at least in their eyes, because they frightened him into a resignation. The only thing that wasn't justified was the attack on Oliver's house, because they were never supposed to attack his house. You might remember, after they tore down his thought-to-be stamp building and burned the effigy, many members of the mob were satisfied and dispersed. Those who could never be satisfied are the ones who caused destruction of Oliver's home and threw rocks at Hutchinson. So it was kind of this side group, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Hutchinson's house being ransacked had nothing to do with the stamps, which made it unacceptable.
Was just violence for the sake of violence is basically what they were saying. And to a certain extent, because any sort of riot or gathering has to have a point and a purpose. And basically what they're saying, even Francis Bernard, the governor, agreed, listen, when they started the thing, we don't like that they rioted, but they had points to make. They had a reason to be mad, and they took matters into their own hands. We kind of wish they would stop doing that, but it's been a precedent. We've seen riots
Yeah.
before. In Britain, we've seen them in the colonies, we've seen them in all over the place. At this point, we're past War of the Roses, okay? There were a lot of riots.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
British know riots. It's just in your blood.
And
But basically they're like, yeah, no, we wish they wouldn't riot, but they had a point. But that second one, y'all
yeah.
were just lusting for blood at this point, and that's not okay.
Right. And Hutchinson himself said that the people behind the first mob never intended for things to go so far. And about his house, he said, quote, "The people in general expressed the utmost detestation of this unparalleled outrage." And an article in the Boston Gazette compared the two mobs, saying they were, quote, "from very different motives, as their conduct was evidently different." And John Hancock, a selectman in Boston, said the Hutchinson House ordeal was quite a different affair, and that he, quote, "abhorred and detested it as much as any man breathing, and would go to great lengths in repairing his loss. But in opposition to this Stamp Act is commendable," which is pretty severe language coming from our mildly worded pancake.
Stop tearing people's stuff down.
Yeah.
You gotta quit. It's enough.
Right. And Samuel Adams, well, he was obviously fine with what happened with the Oliver effigy, even downplaying the Devil Boot riot, saying it was unlikely that more than an effigy showing was planned. And that's because he saw it as the only option after all others had been exhausted. So he saw that riot as like, we tried everything else, and this is what ended up happening.
If
And
you're
then
not going to listen, we'll have to make ourselves heard.
Yes, exactly. And in future years, including the literal next year, when the Sons of Liberty in Boston were commemorating the anniversary of August 14th, the first riot day, they also toasted to, quote, "detestation to the villainous proceedings of the 26th of August last." And yes, they commemorated the effigy tree and riot night, but they commemorated a lot of things with really big celebrations and usually bonfires. But like, what else was there to do? Write an inflammatory article about Thomas Hutchinson in the Boston Gazette? Like, they took a break from that sometimes, you know?
I was going to say they were already doing that. That was their
Yeah.
day job. Now
Yeah.
we celebrate that we still don't like him, but with beer.
Yeah. But long story still long, the organizers lost control of the mob. The Loyal Nine might have kicked off the show with the Devil Boot, but by this point, there were already rumors swirling that the mob had a list of 15 prominent gentlemen and that they wanted, quote, "a war of plunder, of general leveling, and taking away distinction of rich and poor." So this was a rumor swirling around town.
Right.
But that has nothing to do with the Loyal Nine.
Right.
And yet, there was still another meeting in the town because Francis Bernard, royal governor, he had been at Castle William, so he didn't even know what had happened until the next morning after the town meeting. And once he did know, he called a council meeting. And the council put out bounties on the bad actors, promising rewards, higher for the leaders, but also other participants. And soon, the sheriff
Did you
had
see
warrants.
the guy cutting down Tommy's tree? Let us know who he is. There's a reward, friends.
Yeah. Which begs the question, who was responsible? And here's the thing. It was thought that these acts were likely taken out because, remember, Hutchinson wasn't the only target that night. He just got the worst of it because of the crackdown on smuggling. Based on the mob's special interest in Hutchinson's papers, it's thought that some of the bad actors might have been recently named in depositions about smuggling. And he's the Chief Justice. He's got all the court papers.
See, this is when Tommy's like Nepo baby collection of titles is starting to bite him in the butt. Not only did it get a bunch of guys who could have stood up and defended him, not only did it annoy a bunch of them, but it also made a lot more enemies of the guys he was just doing his job over. Smuggling's wrong, okay?
And I think that's the trickiest thing to kind of consider in this point is that Hutchinson didn't want the Chief Justice job. He knew he wasn't qualified and literally kind of got peer pressured into taking it by one Francis Bernard, who had
I was going
said,
to say Francis Bernard bullied him into that.
And then Francis Bernard went on to say that the destruction was carried out because of private resentments, but under the disguise of public cause. And then Bernard said in a letter after the riots that Hutchinson was probably targeted because he was the Chief Justice, and that his being the Chief Justice connected him to the Admiralty and Custom House, and Hutchinson supported those darn writs of assistance. You know, the ones
Yeah.
that let the customs officers grab the police officers to raid any ship suspected of smuggling for profit and basically with
Yeah.
immunity. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bernard went on to say, quote, "The Chief Justice took the lead in granting the writs, and now he has paid for it."
Francis, you made him do that. You were a fan of it too, pumpkin. You were broken from Jersey. Shut up.
Honestly. But when you connect the dots from customs to Hutchinson and the mobs focus on Hutchinson's papers, it makes sense because a lot of important documents that had to do with public affairs went missing that night.
Stop making me feel bad for Thomas. I mean, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of another. Did he dig his own grave? Yeah, but was there a gun to his head forcing him to pick up the shovel in the first place? A little bit.
Yeah.
Could he have made some different choices? Yes, but then could he have actually made those different choices? Honestly, unknowable. There's no possible, if he hadn't supported the writs of assistance, would the heat have come down from across the ocean? Would the British have gotten mad at him for not?
He was really in a sticky situation from all sides.
I mean, the British could absolutely have made him destitute, put him in jail, and left him there.
That's kind of what I think about Thomas Hutchinson. I don't think of him as much as a villain as I do as a scapegoat. He was very much scapegoated by every party all the time.
By both sides.
It was always his fault. But all of that brings us back to Ebenezer Macintosh.
Yeah, we spoke about the angry Scotsman a little bit briefly a couple episodes ago.
And now you're gonna find out about him. I told you I was gonna get to him.
Angry Scotsman.
Ebenezer's name came up fast when that reward was offered. And when he was questioned, he said that he had taken action because of Reverend Mayhew's sermon, who gave this really kind of fiery sermon the day before the Hutchinson riot, you know? And so Macintosh said that he thought he was doing God's work. So who was
the
Ebenezer
pastor told me I could.
Right. That was his excuse. And who was Ebenezer? Well, Ebenezer Macintosh was a shoemaker and a gang leader. Everyone had multiple titles, okay? His were shoemaker and gang leader.
Yes.
Not as much esteem as Hutchinson's, but that's fine. So Ebenezer was taken into custody, but the sheriff was immediately surrounded by a bunch of merchants and other men of property, not the rabble, who told him that if he apprehended Ebenezer, then there would be trouble, which makes sense. No one wanted the mob leader to show up in court where he could name every member in the mob.
Yeah.
And it was also said that if Ebenezer wasn't released, then the customs house would be leveled brick by brick.
Try us.
Yeah.
Like that. No. Look, I'm gonna guide your face. Do you see that pile of rubble? That used to be the lieutenant governor's house.
We're good for it, man. And so obviously, Sheriff Greenleaf released him, and then he had to go and explain the situation to the governor and the council, the lieutenant governor. And Hutchinson was like, "What? So you just let him go?" And the sheriff was like, "Yep." To which Hutchinson replied, quote, "Then you have not done your duty." And later, writing about this incident, Hutchinson said, quote, "And this was all the notice taken of the discharge, and to this feeble state were the powers of government reduced." Like, they literally,
basically,
they got
bro,
the guy.
you had one job. You have messed everything up because you couldn't do your one job. We're pointless at this point because we told you to do a thing. The mob told you to do something different. You did the thing the mob told you to do because why? You're scared of them. And now we're kind of pointless. You Brussels sprout.
And it gets worse, because 6 to 8 others were arrested, and they were sent to prison to await trial. But before the trial, a moderately sized group of folks mobbed the prison keeper's house and threatened him into turning over his keys, and then set the prisoners free, who just disappeared themselves for a few months. Just broke 'em
Easy
out of
enough to
prison.
do in this time period, honestly.
Yeah, yeah. But even John Hancock, a selectman at the time, joined his select bros in refusing to bring the looters to justice because they were scared. Like many rich
Yeah.
folks, some of these rich folks even started storing their valuables at their poorer neighbors' houses just in case.
Just in case. Hey man, can you handle these candlesticks for me? Because I really like them, and they were my great grandma's, and
Yeah. Think you
I
could
don't
just
I don't want to lose those.
keep an eye on all of my silver and fine china. Thanks, pal. Thanks.
I'll like you get to look rich while you're holding on to them for me. Just maybe don't tell anyone that you have it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
And we could kind of get the picture here that at this point in Boston, it is chaos. We are like borderline anarchy. Like
Well,
the rabble is running things.
Well, I was gonna say, but that also proves Thomas's point: is you big great dummy. We can't do anything now. You are our only branch of enforcement. That's literally your job as a sheriff, is to enforce. The
Yeah.
fact that you refuse to enforce, and rich guys are intimidating jail keepers, like, we're pointless. We can't control
Yeah.
this.
And the balance of that, when we look at it from the other side, we can see how these merchants would get to this point, because for years now, since the writs of assistance, what was happening? The
Losing
customs
their crap all the
officials,
time.
they just had to have a reason, right? Just they had to have a justifiable reason. The courts were stacked in their favor, and they could go onto those ships and take anything they said was smuggled, and then they were profiting off of it. So these and at this time, the merchants are going bankrupt. All of their stuff has been taken. Now they're gonna have to, on top of the Sugar Act, where they now had to fill out a bunch of forms and pay a bounty to even be able to do trade. Now all those forms they have to fill out, they're gonna have to pay a stamp fee on top of each one of those papers. So you can
And keep in
kind of
mind, at this
see
point,
how they get to this point after they've begged and they've offered to do anything else.
well, and at this point, remember, the merchants not only keep losing their stuff to the customs officials, not only keep losing their stuff to the writs assistants, they don't have money. They literally do not have any money. They can't go to the general store and buy new meat for their family just to eat, because the Currency Act has made all of the colonial money illegal. And there is not a lot of British currency floating around the colonies, because why would there be? It's not
Yeah.
Britain.
I mean, there's like a little more floating around Boston after they stole it all from Hutchinson's house. But that's not the right way to get the money.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it turns out
And-
that's still bad. But yeah, no, there was no money, and there was all this call to spend money and all this reason to have to pay things with, again, I need to reiterate, what money?
Yeah. And speaking of having no money, people made a pilgrimage to the ruins of Hutchinson's home from miles and miles in every direction, like just to see the destruction. And we're talking in the realm of like 10,000 people. They were horrified because hardly anything remained but the walls. It didn't change their mind about the stamps, though. It did, however, shift the way they viewed how to resist. So what was going on with the stamps at this point, though, right? Because
Yeah, I mean, at this point, they've been technically, the Stamp Act has it enacted?
no, not
it
till
doesn't go into
November
effect
1st.
till like November.
Yeah, November 1st is when the stamps are supposed to take effect. And by early September, Francis Bernard was openly acknowledging how much the stamps were not going to be able to be a thing. But it was also clear to the opposition that violence was politically counterproductive and they needed to course correct the cause. And Samuel Adams, chief rabble rouser, realized that the resistance needed to change methods or it risked changing minds in the wrong direction. So instead of the violent mobs, they needed to get and keep the moral opinion on their side by protesting within legal limits. And the patriots continued their cause by writing a whole lot more.
I was going to say, no, I know. That means more letters. more, more letters
More
arguing with themselves, by the way.
pamphlets.
More pamphlet. I love the fact that several of these guys would write letters and then they would turn around and write rebuttal letters to themselves. So they would occupy entire papers arguing with just them, not each other. Just they all did it.
That was like Samuel Adams' specialty, because if he could write as a Tory, if he could write as a loyalist and make that loyalist seem really dumb and malicious, then he could come in from his side and propagandize that argument to change opinion. That was like his specialty. But in a lot of these writings, not just from Samuel, they were justifying the Oliver riot and condemning the Hutchinson remix, really explaining the ins and outs between just and unjust uprisings. Because remember, morality was really important at this time. I made myself laugh, so I'm glad it made you laugh too. But morality was this huge, important thing during this time. Like the morals were so focused on it. And so what they were doing was explaining to everybody the difference between what was just and unjust, the morality of riots and the immorality of riots, because there could be moral riots at this time, right?
Well, it's interesting to note here when we're talking about morality culture, which is different than what we say when we say morality culture in the modern age. But when we're talking about morals and honor, that's part of the reason it was like everyone managed to take note of how messed up looking Thomas Hutchinson was when he walked into the court building, because the morals, honor, and standard at the time
And
meant
your reputation.
Any man of means willingly showing up disheveled, rumpled, clearly emotionally unstable, just in public would be enough for real pearls to be clutched. And then he walks into a sacred building, not a church, but like an important government structure. And he acknowledged his own role in this as a leader of this, looking like absolute dumpster fire.
Yeah.
That was he did that on purpose. He didn't have a whole bunch of choice because, everything was
right. He could have just not shown up, but he did.
But he conscientiously went, look what y'all did to me.
And that's also because of his own honor, right? Because the reputation and the honor was so important in this time. I mean, even the father of our country, George Washington, almost didn't go to the Constitutional Convention because of his reputation and what that would mean in posterity. Like, this is how important this was, especially because when we're talking about a time where money didn't work the same way back then, even if you had it, it just didn't work the same way. So a lot of stuff, when you're talking about like the barter system or credit, your reputation could mean the difference between getting to feed your family or not.
Yeah, like that's the credit system that we view is different. So when we're working on credit, what that means is, well, it's John Hancock. So of course he might have to sell a painting, but he is definitely going to pay me for this wine that he ordered. So I don't need to get money right now, because one of two things is going to happen. Either he's going to hit me up later and drop some cash in my lap, or I'm going to go up to him and go, hey, remember that half a boat of wine that I brought in from France for you? Hey, so I actually need a favor.
Yes, this is very much how it worked. And so while all of this is happening and they're trying to convince the people of the difference between the moral and immorality of these protests and riots, obviously Samuel Adams was there writing, because that's what he did.
That's what he does.
And of the riot of Andrew Oliver's home, the Little Black Cloud, Samuel wrote, quote, after taking all legal steps to obtain redress to no purpose, the whole people of England would have taken the same steps and justified themselves. So he's saying, we tried everything.
Y'all have done this
and
too.
In England, they would have done it too. Because remember, they loved being Englishmen at this time. They weren't going for independence, and they loved England and being English. And so by roping that in, it is just proving the point further.
And again, England at this time had a culture of rebellion, and riots. That's how the English peasants, the English people, settled things more times than not. Oh, we don't like what a king is doing? Riot. Hey, we got a new king. Oh, he actually sucks more. Riot. The
They did
Peasants'
like the
Revolt
riots.
was happened in the 1300s, and that set a charge, and the British people loved their riots from there on out.
Mm-hmm.
And the colonists were British people.
They were. They were. And I mentioned Reverend Mayhew, right? He was the
Yeah.
one who had given that sermon the day before the riot. Well,
God wants you to do this.
even he was publicly changing not his opinion, but the way he talked about it, right? Because this is really what they were doing. It wasn't that they were like, no, we should just accept the stamps now because we didn't like this. It was, guys, we are after the stamps and nothing else. Let's focus. Let's focus. Because he had said, like, yeah,
we can't be mad at everything all at once. Fix one problem at a time.
One at a time. We can't do it all at the same time. And Reverend Mayhew, he was like, yes, people have the right to resist oppression and, quote, take the administration of government into their own hands, but only when it's clear that it's the only option to take for the public good. And the people need to unite and make that decision together. And he clarified that this choice should only be made when, quote, ordinary methods of proceeding had failed. So he's saying, like, we're only going to resist the laws that don't make sense. The laws that make sense and help us, even if you're mad at it because you broke it and now you're in trouble, that is a just law, and that's what keeps this society functioning. We have to disobey the laws that hurt us. And he said that it was important for people themselves to consider, quote, whether the evils imposed by those they have entrusted with the administration of public affairs is greater than they would suffer from the dissolution or suspension of government in its usual forms. So he's asking people to consider what's worse before they make this decision. Is what the government is doing worse, or would it be worse if we didn't have the government at all? Like, this is it. This wasn't a push. It was really a thought piece, right? Like let's consider what things we need to prioritize within this thought framework.
Well, and it's important because basically he's saying, yes, burning it down is technically an option. We can burn it all down. But then what do we do? What do we put in place? We don't want to burn it down. We want to prune off the injured limbs. We don't have to chop the whole tree down just because a few of the branches have become broken. We can just pull those down.
Yes. And Mayhew, who did deny publicly, he publicly denied having any responsibility. He's like, like, I didn't think that my sermon was going to incite a riot, So he is totally denying any sort of responsibility. But
Which,
he also,
honestly, I believe. I believe he was like, "Oh man, I'm gonna stir so much spirit. Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh, I stirred too hard."
Yes, exactly. He denied responsibility while also saying that he should have chosen his words more carefully because he didn't realize what that could do. But he did also send a letter
I
to
didn't mean
Thomas.
to start a riot. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And he sent a letter to Thomas Hutchinson after the riot saying that he didn't think his words would incite a riot and, quote, if the loss of his whole estate would take back the sermon, he would willingly part. And Thomas accepted his apology. He was like, yeah, this seems legit, man.
Yeah, no, we've all said dumb stuff before. It's fine.
Yeah.
If anyone knows about saying dumb stuff and inserting his foot in his mouth, dude, it started early in his career. No, I won't take James Otis's job. No. Yeah. Okay, I'll get it. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, oops.
Oopsie. Yeah, no, we've all said stupid stuff. It makes sense. You're cool, bro.
Yeah. And at this point, the Loyal Nine and friends had made sure that Boston knew they would happily send their mobs on anyone in opposition of them, but they also had a problem to solve in order to continue fighting their good fight. Even with Francis Bernard admitting that he, quote, did not have the command of 10 men and was governor only in name.
None of these guys are going to listen to me. So it's a fun title that I've got. It doesn't do me any good. Thanks.
He was like, maybe 8 people listen to me. I can count on 2 hands the amount of people I have power over right now. Uh, but
The
the
rest of
Loyal
y'all
Nine,
just ignore me.
yeah. And the Loyal Nine now had to figure out how to unite the tradesmen, the merchants, the militia, and Ebenezer and his gang. And so they started organizing more. And soon the Loyal Nine was the Sons of Liberty. And soon other branches of the Sons of Liberty started popping up all across the colonies. And you might be wondering where the Sons of Liberty got their name. And if you weren't wondering, I'm still going to tell you because I want to.
Hey, Tori. Hey, Tori. Where did the Sons of Liberty get their name?
I'm so glad you asked. Because technically, you have already kind of heard about this. Because you might remember, back before the Stamp Act passed, there was debate in the House of Commons over in England, where one, Charles Townshend, whose name will be important sooner than later now, said that Americans were, quote, children planted by our care, nourished up by our indulgence, blah, blah, really patting themselves on the back for all they did for Americans with the salutary neglect. But then there was this Colonel Isaac Barre, a veteran of the 7 Years' War who fought on American soil, who responded, quote, planted by your care? No, your oppressions planted them in America. They fled from your tyranny, nourished up by your indulgence. They grew by your neglect. And as soon as you began to care about them, that care was exercised intending persons to rule over them, to spy out their liberty, misrepresent their actions, and prey upon them. Men whose behavior on my occasions has caused the blood of these Sons of Liberty to recoil within them. And there we have the origin story for the Sons of Liberty. They claim that name so quick.
No, it makes sense.
Yeah.
You are the reason we're here, but it's not the reason you think. We left.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't send us. We ran away.
Which is the truth. And on the next episode of Founded, we're going to see how rapidly things change again just a few weeks later when a boat arrives in Boston Harbor from England with stamps and big goose news. And also, there was a special election in Boston for an open seat in the House of Representatives. I wonder who ends up filling it. I'm kidding. I don't wonder that. I know who filled it, but you might be wondering. So tune in next week. But thank you for listening to this episode of Founded. I hope you found something interesting. Drop an email at foundedhistory@gmail.com and let us know what you want to find out next. And remember, we don't see history repeat itself, but we continue to hear the echoes. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like Childproof, Bibliophage, and a bunch of other podcasts that don't feature Gwenna and I, like Benjamin Franklin's World. We'll see you next time. Well, you'll see us.